I never imagined finding a connection through an angry customer call. That afternoon started like any other at the call center, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the constant clatter of keyboards, and my headset firmly in place. "Thank you for calling customer support. This is Hector speaking. How may I assist you today?" Her voice crackled through my headset, sharp with frustration. She launched into a detailed complaint about our company's marketing software glitching during an important real estate presentation. But something about her articulate explanation caught my attention. Even angry, she remained professional. I walked her through the troubleshooting steps, and her tone gradually shifted from frustrated to appreciative. We discovered we shared the same dry sense of humor. When she made a witty comment about Mercury being in retrograde affecting software, I couldn't help but laugh. The call lasted longer than usual. Her name was Allison, and she worked in marketing for a real estate firm. As I wrapped up the ticket, she surprised me by complimenting my patience and asking for my direct line in case of future technical emergencies. Over the next few weeks, Allison called several times with minor issues. Each conversation flowed naturally beyond tech support into personal territory. I learned about her ambitions in real estate marketing, and she seemed genuinely interested in my stories about difficult customers and office politics. After our fifth call, she suggested meeting for coffee since we worked just a few blocks apart. I found myself adjusting my tie in the bathroom mirror before heading to the cafe. When I saw her, my heart skipped. She had this magnetic presence, confident yet approachable in her business attire. That coffee meeting turned into lunch, which turned into dinner the following week. There was an ease to our conversations that I hadn't experienced in years. Allison's drive and determination were infectious. When she talked about her career goals, her eyes lit up in a way that made me want to share my own dreams. Looking back, who would have thought that a complaint call would lead to butterflies in my stomach? Sometimes the best connections happen in the most unexpected places. That first year with Allison was pure magic. Our coffee dates turned into dinner dates, movie nights morphed into weekend getaways. She'd surprise me at work with lunch, making my coworkers jealous of our public displays of affection in the break room. When she laughed at my terrible jokes, her whole face lit up, and I found myself falling deeper every day. 6 months in, we moved in together. Our apartment became this perfect blend of her sleek modern taste and my comfortable, lived-in style. Sunday mornings meant tangled limbs and lazy breakfasts, planning our future between bites of French toast and sips of coffee. I proposed on our 1-year anniversary. Took her back to the coffee shop where we first met in person. He got down on one knee right by the table where she'd once sat across from me, no longer the angry customer but the woman who'd completely changed my life. Her eyes welled up before I even finished asking, and her yes came out as a half laugh, half cry. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. Everything was perfect, the venue, the flowers, the weather. Allison looked breathtaking in her dress. But during the reception, something felt off. She introduced me to Scott, a colleague from her real estate firm. Tall guy, expensive suit, perfect hair. The way they hugged lasted a beat too long. Their inside jokes and shared glances made my stomach turn. "Oh, Scott's been my rock at work," she said, touching his arm. The champagne turned sour in my mouth. The first few months of marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. We settled into a routine that felt natural and right. Allison was an amazing wife, thoughtful, affectionate, always making our home feel warm and welcoming. We talked about our future, about kids, about building a life together. Then came that conversation over dinner. I brought up starting a family, excited to begin this next chapter. Allison put down her fork, got real quiet. "I think we should wait," she said. 2 years minimum. I need to focus on my career right now. It hit me like a punch to the gut. We talked about having kids before the wedding, agreed we both wanted them soon. Now she was changing the plan, moving the goalposts. When I pressed her about it, she got defensive, accused me of not supporting her professional goals. We went to bed that night with an invisible wall between us, the first real crack in our perfect life together. The tension lingered, unspoken but heavy. I tried to be understanding, to give her space to pursue her ambitions. But every time she mentioned a late meeting or a business dinner, that nagging feeling from the wedding day would resurface, along with thoughts of Scott and that too long hug. The promotion hit like a thunderbolt. One day Allison came home bouncing off the walls, waving a letter in her hand. Regional Marketing Director. The position she'd been gunning for since before we met. Her excitement filled our apartment, and I smiled, genuinely happy for her success. But that smile faded as she rattled off what the job entailed: frequent travel, long hours, constant networking events. The first month wasn't so bad. A few 2-day trips here and there. I kept myself busy with work, hit the gym more often, caught up on reading. But then the trips stretched longer. 3 days became 5. Weekly travels became bi-weekly. Our spacious apartment, once a symbol of our success, morphed into an empty shell that amplified my footsteps. I started eating dinner alone most nights, the TV providing background noise to fill the silence. Our regular Friday date nights dwindled. When she was home, she was buried in her laptop or on calls. The physical distance was one thing, but the emotional gap grew wider with each passing week. Scott's constant presence didn't help. He showed up at our place unannounced, always with some work emergency that required Allison's immediate attention. I'd come home to find them huddled over spreadsheets at our dining table, coffee cups scattered around them. Their inside jokes and shared glances made my stomach churn. The morning calls were worse. I'd wake up to Allison's hushed voice in the kitchen. "Yes, Scott, I'll check those numbers before the meeting." Always Scott. Always early. Always urgent. During one of her rare weekends home, I found a receipt from a high-end restaurant in Seattle, a city she'd visited for work the previous week. The date matched her trip. 2 glasses of wine. 2 entrees. When I asked about it, she brushed it off. Just a work dinner with the team. But I knew Scott had been on that trip too. The isolation crept in slowly, like a fog rolling over our life. Our apartment, with its modern furniture and carefully chosen artwork, felt more like a hotel room, somewhere Allison passed through between trips, rather than our home. I started dreading the sound of her rolling suitcase on the hardwood floors, knowing another departure was imminent. Each time she left, Scott was there, picking her up, dropping her off, calling to coordinate their travel plans. Their shared calendar became fuller while ours remained empty. The business trips multiplied: Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, always with Scott by her side. The doorbell rang at 9 p.m. 2 police officers stood at my doorstep, their faces stern and professional. Before I could process what was happening, they asked me to come with them to the station for questioning. The drive felt surreal. My mind raced through possibilities, but nothing made sense. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they led me into a small interrogation room. The metal chair was cold, uncomfortable. "Where were you between 7 and 8 p.m. tonight, Mr. Martinez?" I rubbed my temples. At home. Alone. Allison's on another business trip with the words caught in my throat. With Scott. The detective exchanged glances with his partner. Scott Anderson was attacked tonight. Someone beat him severely and then set him on fire in his own driveway. He's in critical condition, comatose. My stomach dropped. The room started spinning. What? I don't understand. They showed me photos. Scott's car, his house, evidence markers scattered across the driveway. Then came the questions about my relationship with Allison, about Scott. "We have reason to believe your wife and Mr. Anderson have been involved in a romantic relationship for the past 8 months. The words hit like a physical blow. 8 months. My hands started shaking. There are multiple hotel receipts, text messages, photos. The detective's voice seemed distant. "We also found evidence suggesting this wasn't Mr. Anderson's only workplace relationship. Your wife appears to have been aware of his other affairs." My throat went dry. Other affairs? They showed me more evidence. Email exchanges, photos from security cameras, hotel records. The timeline of betrayal unfolded before me, business trips that never existed, late meetings that were lies. The signs had been there all along, but I'd refused to see them. "Did you know about any of this, Mr. Martinez?" I stared at the table, my vision blurring. No, I trusted her. My voice cracked. The weight of everything crashed down at once. The shared jokes during those first phone calls, the coffee dates, our wedding day, it all felt tainted now, corrupted by lies. The detective pushed a box of tissues across the table. I hadn't even realized I was crying. They continued asking questions, but I barely heard them. My mind kept replaying moments, rewriting memories. Every late night at the office, every business trip, every time she pulled away from my touch, it all made sense now. Cruel, painful sense. "We'll need you to stay in town while we continue our investigation," the detective said. I nodded numbly. Hours passed in that room. By the time they finally let me go, the sun was rising. I stood outside the police station, watching early morning traffic pass by, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. But this was my reality now, my wife, my marriage, everything I thought I knew, all of it built on lies. The drive home from the police station felt surreal, like I was watching someone else navigate through familiar streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tight, knuckles white against the black leather. The moment I pushed open our apartment door, her perfume hit me. That vanilla scent she always wore. It made my stomach turn. I grabbed the largest suitcase from our closet, the one we'd used on our honeymoon to Mari. The zipper sounded too loud in the empty apartment as I yanked it open. Her clothes still hung neatly in color-coordinated rows. I started grabbing handfuls, the silk blouses she wore to important meetings, the dresses she claimed were just for work dinners. Now I knew better. Each item held a different lie. In the bathroom, her expensive creams and makeup cluttered the counter. I swept them into a toiletry bag, trying not to remember how she'd spend ages getting ready in the mornings. The gold wedding band on my finger caught the light. I twisted it off and dropped it on the counter with a hollow ping. The bedside drawer revealed a stack of hotel receipts she'd forgotten to dispose of, names of places I'd never been to, dates that matched her business trips. My hands shook as I stuffed them in my pocket, more evidence of her deceit. Pictures of us still decorated the walls. That beaming smile of hers at our wedding. Her arms wrapped around me at Christmas, our first vacation together. I yanked them down one by one, adding them to a growing pile of memories I couldn't bear to look at anymore. Under the bed I found one of her shoes, an expensive heel she'd been looking everywhere for. It had probably kicked off during one of their encounters. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I hurled it into the suitcase with enough force to crack the heel. Each item I packed was another betrayal, another moment she'd chosen him over me. The life we built together crumbled with every piece of clothing, every photograph, every memory I stuffed away. When Allison walked through the door that night, I'd already been sitting in the dark, waiting. I didn't do that cliché thing, flicking the lights on at some dramatic moment. No, I just sat there feeling tired, hollow maybe. She was still fumbling with her keys as I spoke. "Scott's in the hospital." Her footsteps froze, the noise of her keys fading into nothing. For a second, just a second, she didn't seem to understand. But then, man, I saw it. That look. Shock first, yeah, but then panic. Full-blown panic. My words weren't even fully out, and already I could see her brain running a mile a minute, barely registering anything else. I told her what I learned at the station. About how the police came to me, how they revealed the affair like it was some dirty secret dug out of a forgotten closet. But as I was speaking, explaining the timeline, because I needed her to know I knew, I couldn't help but notice her reactions. No guilt. Not for us, not for me, not for our wreck of what was supposed to be our life together. No, her face was doing rapid calculations about something else entirely. "Scott." Her eyes glossed over, barely flicking my way as I laid it all out. The man she'd been screwing behind my back had gotten himself beaten up, possibly worse, and suddenly that was all that seemed to matter. She interrupted me, almost like an afterthought. "Wait, how bad is he?" That's when I really felt it. Like being punched in the gut with something too heavy to hold. The weight of realization that everything had been about him. About them. Not our life together. Not whatever we'd planned or built. Just concern for someone she hadn't even had the decency to be honest with me about. "He's alive," I managed to get out, my voice rough, despite the pit forming in my gut. But they didn't tell me everything. I listed the injuries, told her whatever the detectives had been willing to share, talking mechanically by then, like it wasn't even my life falling apart in front of me. Allison couldn't have cared less about the formalities, though. Each word I said was just information to feed the growing panic I saw brewing in her. I watched as her thoughts went straight to Scott. Her lips began moving fast, questions lining up, not for me, but for whatever hospital she was rushing toward already in her head. "You need to slow down," I tried, my voice sharper than intended. It didn't snap her out of it, nothing I said could. She didn't look at me at full. Her eyes darted around. Then came the flurry. Grabbing her coat, searching for her phone. Stumbling into the hallway almost like some kind of reflex. Like I wasn't even a real part of this picture anymore. "I need to get to him," she choked out, her voice high and strained, more emotion in those few words than I'd heard her use for us in months. When was the last time she looked at me like that? Hell, when she looked at us like that? I sat there, watching her move around like a whirlwind, completely detached from the fact that this was the moment she should have sat down, cried with me, begged for forgiveness, or at least had something to say for herself about what we were supposed to be. Instead, it was Scott on her mind, Scott fucking Anderson, the man who destroyed everything, with her being a willing accomplice every step of the way. She didn't even clue into the fact that the only reason Scott's in a hospital right now is consequences. The police would revisit her, would ask her new questions. Her obsession with getting to him now overwhelmed any sense of responsibility for what she broke in our marriage or for getting ahead of what might come. I couldn't quite understand. Didn't she have even enough shame to talk to me? "You're going to him?" I even asked, knowing full well the answer already. Her back was turned by then. She was halfway out the door, saving me the pain of finishing the question. "Yes, I need to see him." That did it. A flicker of something in my chest, that last ounce of hope snuffed out like a candle. Geez, I'd been clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, some part of her would still see me in all of this. But in the end, her eyes didn't even seem to bother meeting mine before she rushed out the door. I didn't move for a while. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway felt far away. Everything felt muted, like life had glanced my way and decided to look elsewhere. Funny, isn't it? You think heartbreak comes all at once, like something tearing into you at full force, but instead, it's slow, a steady bleed. Rip after rip. She didn't even stop to acknowledge what we were supposed to be rebuilding. She never even put Scott's affair with other people into the context of who she was to him. Maybe that's what stung the worst, the fact I now sat alone in our home. And it was like I didn't exist at all. It had been that way for longer than I even realized, I guess. As the minutes melted into one another, I scanned the room without seeing it. Wedding photos strewn in one pile on the floor next to her things, half of them still in frames. Empty spaces on the walls where our memories were supposed to hang. My ring sat on the coffee table. Cold. Untouched. The one thing left that still had weight I could feel. Everything else was a huge drift of nothing. Nothing tangible beyond knowing I was yesterday's story, and she had become someone else's priority. I heard the front door open around midnight. Allison's heels clicked against the hardwood floor, her steps slower and heavier than usual. The apartment stayed dark. I hadn't bothered turning on any lights since she left. "Scott's stable. They said he'll recover, but he took some bad hits to the head." Her voice cracked. "He might need surgery for his." "Stop." The word came out sharp, cutting through her medical report. "Just stop talking about Scott." She fell silent, hovering near the doorway. The streetlight through the window cast enough glow to see her mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. "How long?" I asked. "Hector, How long?" She wrapped her arms around herself. 8 months. The timeline clicked into place. All those late meetings, business trips, missed dinners. While I'd been home waiting, planning our future, she'd been building a different life. 8 months. I let out a hollow laugh. "So when we renewed our vows on our anniversary..." "Please, I can explain." "What's there to explain? You stood there, promised to love and honor me, while you were sleeping with him. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness that got out of control." Her voice took on that persuasive tone she used with clients. "We can work through this. Go to counseling." "Your moment of weakness lasted 8 months. I stood up, my hands shaking. "You didn't even ask if I was okay when you got home. First words out of your mouth were about him. Because he's hurt. He could have died. And our marriage. That didn't matter enough to mention." She stepped toward me, reaching out. "Of course it matters. I love." "Don't." I backed away from her touch. "Don't you dare say you love me right now." Her hand dropped. In the dim light, I could see her eyes darting to her phone, probably wondering about more updates on Scott. "I called a lawyer today," I said. "Papers should be ready next week." That got her attention. "Divorce? Just like that, without even trying to?" "There's nothing to try. You made your choice. 8 months of choices, actually." She stood there silent, tears falling now, but I knew they weren't for me, for us. They were for the man in the hospital bed, for her shattered image of their future together. "I packed your things," I said, gesturing to the suitcase by the wall. "You should go." She didn't argue, didn't fight for our marriage, or beg forgiveness. Just picked up the suitcase and walked to the door. Her final words were barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the dark apartment. The same apartment where we built our life, made plans, shared dreams. Now, just an empty space filled with memories I couldn't trust anymore. The days blend together after Allison moves out. I go through the motions at work, barely registering the customer complaints and technical issues I'm supposed to handle. My phone buzzes constantly with her messages, but I can't bring myself to read them. One evening, while microwaving a frozen dinner, my phone lights up with her name again. The voicemail she leaves feels different, her voice cracking with emotion. "Hector, please. I know I messed up. I miss you so much. Can we just talk?" I delete it immediately, but her words linger. The next morning, more text messages. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. I think about you every day. Please give me another chance." Each message chips away at my resolve, but then I remember how she ran straight to Scott that night, not even looking back. The timeline the detectives laid out replays in my mind 8 months of lies of her sleeping next to me after being with him. She shows up at my office during lunch break. I spot her through the glass doors wearing the blue dress I bought her for her birthday. My co-workers give me concerned looks as I duck out the back entrance. The emails start next. Long paragraphs about how sorry she is, how she never meant to hurt me, how she'd do anything to make it right. But between the lines, I read what she's really saying. She's sorry she got caught. Sorry she lost the stability I provided. Sorry her perfect life fell apart. One night she leaves a package at my doorstep. Inside are old photos of us, ticket stubs from concerts we attended, the silly love notes we used to write. A letter sits on top. "Remember how happy we were? We could have this again." But we can't. Those memories are tainted now. Every happy moment is overshadowed by questions. Was she already seeing him then? Was she thinking of him while smiling in these photos? The worst messages come late at night. "I still love you," she writes. "I made a horrible mistake." But I know she's probably lying in the bed she now shares with Scott, missing the comfort of our life together rather than actually missing me. Her mother calls next, pleading Allison's case. "She's a mess, Hector. Can't you at least hear her out?" I hang up and block her number 2. Each attempt at contact feels like reopening a wound that's barely started to heal. The guilt she wants to unload on me isn't mine to carry. The final straw comes when she sends me a long email detailing every moment she regretted her choices with Scott. How meaningless it all was. How she wishes she could turn back time. But there's no mention of my pain, my humiliation, the life she stole from me. It's all about her suffering, her loss, her regret. I forward the email to my lawyer without reading the rest. Let him handle any future communication. I'm done letting her words poison my healing. The empty apartment became my sanctuary in prison. After changing the locks, I spent countless nights sitting in silence, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I might have missed. The weight of Allison's betrayal crushed my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't sleep in our bed anymore. The couch became my new home. One morning I walked into my bathroom and caught myself staring at my reflection. Dark circles under my eyes, unkempt beard, hollow expression. I didn't recognize this broken man. Something snapped inside me. I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest gym, signing up for a membership on the spot. The rhythmic sound of weights hitting the floor became my new therapy. Every rep of sweat felt like releasing pieces of pain. Between sets, memories would flood back. Our first coffee date, our wedding day, the moment I saw her look at Scott the way she used to look at me. But instead of drowning in them, I channeled that hurt into my workouts. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez. Initially, I resisted opening up, but she helped me understand that Allison's actions weren't about my worth. "Your capacity to love deeply isn't a weakness," she'd say. "It's a strength that was misused by someone else." The healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd feel stronger, ready to move forward. Other days, a song on the radio or catching a whiff of her perfume on an old sweater would send me spiraling. But each time I got back up, the recovery period got shorter. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Mike and Dave dragged me to basketball games, forced me to join their weekend hiking trips. Being around their genuine friendship reminded me that not every relationship was built on lies. Work became another anchor. I threw myself into projects, earned a promotion. My colleagues noticed the change, not just in my performance, but in how I carried myself. The wounded, desperate energy that had clung to me started to fade. 6 months after Allison moved out, I cleaned out the last of her things from the apartment. Each item I'd packed held less power over me. The photos that once tortured me became just pieces of paper. Our wedding album, which I'd been avoiding, was just a book documenting a beautiful lie. The most profound change came when I realized I no longer needed Allison's remorse to heal. Her constant attempts to explain herself, her tears and apologies, they weren't for me. They were for her own guilt. Understanding this freed me from waiting for closure that would never come. Through therapy and self-reflection, I began to see my marriage's end not as a failure, but as a harsh lesson in self-worth. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize red flags instead of explaining them away. The experience taught me that love shouldn't require sacrificing your dignity or peace of mind. My heart was still capable of love, but now it came with wisdom. I knew what I deserved, what real partnership looked like. The pain that once threatened to break me had forged something stronger, a deeper understanding of myself and what I wanted from life. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.